Hey everybody, welcome to ARE Live. I'm Mark Tier, the founder of Black Spectacles. And during the webinar today, we're going to give you a taste of what our virtual workshops are like by going over some of the group exercises which focus on practice management, that particular division. Virtual workshops are pretty new. I didn't say that very well. Virtual workshops are pretty new, so let me tell you a little bit about them. So what we do is for 2 hours every Sunday, we've organized group sessions that are led by licensed architects like Paul, who recently passed the ARE. And then during these sessions, the instructor administers a couple of lessons that are targeted to the most difficult topics on the test. Then you get to work on the lessons in a group setting and get feedback from the group. And then at the end, we always leave a little bit of time for Q&A, so you can be sure to get your questions answered. So if you don't have virtual workshops in your membership with Black Spectacles, you can upgrade to our expert subscription, which is actually the only place where you can get virtual workshops, and that will give you access to them every Sunday. So moving on, though, want to comment briefly on what's going on at Prometric and with the test in general. So today is November 12th, 2020. The testing centers are currently open, but with reduced capacity, which means that there just aren't as many seats as usual. So we just want to encourage you to register for your exam as soon as possible so you can be sure that you get a seat when you want one. And the really exciting news is that NCARB has announced that starting on December 14th, 2020, you can register to take the ARE online, which means you don't have to go into the testing center at all. They did, there was an earlier date that they had previously announced, but they pushed it back to December 14th, 2020. So I think that's a really great advancement. There's actually no changes to the content or to the division structure. They just, I think they reduced the test duration a little bit. And I think there's actually a couple fewer questions. Other than that, it's basically the same test. And if this isn't your cup of tea, you can still take the exam in person if you want. So we just posted the link in the chat here in GoToWebinar for you to visit NCARB's site for all the detail, just to make sure you're up to date with everything. But wanted to mention that to you guys. For those of you who are joining us here for the first time on ARE Live, Black Spectacles is the first ever NCARB approved test prep provider for all 6 of the ARE divisions. We offer comprehensive test prep for the ARE with video lectures, practice exams, flashcards, and of course, virtual workshops. And it's all available online with memberships available for either individual architects or firms or schools or AI chapters. To read a little bit about our individual memberships and see what kind of materials we offer, you can go to blackspectacles.com, and we just shared a link about that. If you're in a firm and you'd like to learn a little bit more about how you can get your whole firm on a membership and have your boss pay for access, we're actually hosting a webinar about firm memberships on November 19th at 12 p.m. Central. And so we're sharing a link about that too. It'll be great. You'll be able to get a little bit of information about that. And figure out how to, if it makes sense for your office. At our next ARE Live broadcast, which will be on December 17th, this is going to be an awesome one, like today, but a little bit different actually, in that we're speaking with a learning expert. So, and she's going to be talking about the best study tactics and strategies to help you pass the ARE. Dawn is, we've worked with her for a while. She's absolutely an expert in how learning works, and also how organizations like NCARB craft the ARE, which is really, if you had that kind of knowledge, it really helps you as you're sort of navigating the test. So I think it's going to be really a wonderful session, which you can register if you go to blackspectacles.com/podcast. You'll find a link there as well. We're having a giveaway today. We're going to be engaging exclusively on our online ARE community. So head over to that thread. I just typed in community.blackspectacles.com and then click on ARE Live. And we pinned today's discussion at the top. It says ARE Live PcM Virtual Workshop Exercise. And let's see. We're going to be giving away, for everyone who posts in our thread today, this thread that I just mentioned, you'll be eligible to win a free Black Spectacles t-shirt. So all you have to do is go over there and just say hi in that thread. But of course, the real reason it's here is, as a vehicle for you to ask questions. So we're manning this and happy to answer any questions that you guys might have here. So of course, do that if you like, and then, stay tuned until the end to see if you won the free t-shirt. And then lastly, today we have a special discount on Black Spectacles individual memberships to share and help you along in your journey. So we'll provide that coupon code at the end of the show. So stick around for that. Now, our distinguished guest today is Paul Mosher. He's a project manager and registered architect in North Carolina for Cluck Design Collaborative, which is a small firm that focuses on commercial and mixed-use development renovations and new construction projects. Before being hired by Cluck Design in 2017, he studied at Clemson University, go Tigers, where he and his colleagues were awarded the first patent in the history of Clemson's College of Architecture, which is pretty amazing. He's done a lot of work with Black Spectacles since 2019, has worked with multiple groups in our former group coaching program, and he helped to develop a number of the exercises for our virtual workshops, as well as leading them. So that's a little bit about Paul. Paul, welcome to ARE Live, and with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Mark. Yeah, and also I want to mention that I actually got one of those Black Spectacles t-shirts.
Woo!
Something just like that, and I still wear it today. So
That's funny.
Yeah, it's a great t-shirt. Yeah, so welcome everybody. Thanks for that introduction, Mark. Today we're going to be going over firm financial metrics and just sort of the basic internal metrics that you need to cover, you need to know for this ARE practice management. And this comes directly from the ARE 5.0 handbook, objective 2.1, evaluate the financial well-being of the practice. And the ARE 5.0 handbook, I always encourage candidates to constantly be going back and looking at that ARE 5.0 handbook to make sure that they're on track studying what they need to study. Also, I believe that it was just recently updated, the ARE 5.0 handbook in maybe last month. Mark, do you know?
Yeah, I think so. It was updated last month.
Right. So I don't believe anything in practice management changed, but just as a heads up to go and re-download that if you might have the one from July when it was updated prior to this past update. So anyway, I guess we can jump right into it. Is that right?
Yeah, have at it, man.
All right, great. So throughout this exercise today, we have this basic firm that we are going to be figuring out, how is their utilization rate going? What's their overhead rate? Talking about direct labor. So this is our basic firm. So we have a principal making 100,000, a project architect at 75, 2 architects in training at 50, and administrative staff making 30,000. General office expenses of $92,000 a year, and then additional indirect expenses of $198,750 a year. And then where you see billed hours, that is hours that were billed specifically to a project. So it's hours that once they were billed, brought money back into the firm. And then we can also assume that every person worked 2,080 hours each year, which is just 52 weeks times 40. All right, so here we get into calculating the utilization rate for each member of the firm. So the utilization rate is basically a number that shows as a decimal the percentage of time that any individual employee is billing out to a project that is making the firm money. So when we're calculating that, it's just the billed hours times the total hours, the billed hours divided by the total hours worked in the year. So let me get my notes working here. Bear with me one moment. Right, so 1,500 divided by 2,000 2080 is going to be 0.72. So the principal has a utilization rate of 0.72 for the year. Likewise, if we go down the list, the project architect, if you take 1800 divided by 2080, you get 0.87. And then the architects and training each have a utilization rate of 0.85. And then lastly, the administrative staff has a utilization rate of 0.06 because most of their work is going to be internal. The utilization rate is really looking at the hours that are billed out. So if you're following along with us, that would be, for calculate the utilization rate of each member of the firm, that would be B in the, what would you call that, Mark? The piece that you posted in the ARE Live in the forum.
The question, I'm sorry?
The question, sorry,
Yeah, the mock exam.
The mock exam, yeah. So it'd be, for number 1, that's a B. Principal 0.72, 0.87, 0.85, 0.85, and 0.06.
Nice.
All right. So this utilization rate, what is this utilization rate used for? So does it help a manager understand who is currently being underutilized for billable work? It will help a manager set the billable rate of a worker. C, a manager can calculate the direct labor costs to the firm for each worker with the utilization rate. Or D, answers A and C. So the answer here is going to be D. And so the utilization rate, if you have a spreadsheet of all of the utilization rates within the company, anybody who has a low utilization rate, as long as they're not, administrative staff or someone that's mostly working internally, if it's somebody that's billing out most of their time and they have a low utilization rate, it usually means that they can take on another project because at the moment they don't have a lot on their plate and they have time for more. And then it's C because with the utilization rate, the manager is going to be able to understand what the direct labor cost for each individual employee is for the firm, which we'll get into on question number 3. And the reason that it's not question B, it will help a manager set the billable rate of a worker. So billable rates have a whole bunch of pieces. There are a whole bunch of pieces that go into how you set a billable rate, how you set an hourly rate. And so you're not only covering, the cost of the worker, but you're also covering the cost of the rent, and you're looking at what your profit that you're trying to make is. And so A and C are the best answers, which is why the correct answer is D, and B is just not quite, it doesn't have quite enough information there for it to be the correct answer. All right. So moving on to number 3. So calculate the utilization rate for the entire firm. So again, utilization rate is the total direct labor hours divided by the total labor hours. And so here, this 10,400, this is simply all of these added up. 2,080 times 5 is 10,400. And then we add up all of the billed hours and we get 6,968. And when you divide 6,968 by 10,400, you get 0.67. So the answer number 3 is 0.67.
Paul, one question for you, maybe
Sure.
from the group is that 2080. There's a little fuzziness about where the 2080 number came from. Can you just explain that to folks?
Sure. So the 2080, we're assuming here that we're working 40-hour work week, so standard work week, and then we're working 52 weeks a year. So even though hopefully we're getting some vacation there, we're going to go ahead and assume that it's paid vacation. So the firm is going to look at the hours in the year as 2,080, 52 times 40.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
You bet. All right, so number 4, an employee's low utilization rate might be indicative of which of the following? The employee hasn't been working with the firm very long. B, the employee could take on another project. C, the employee is completing multiple CA hours, construction administration hours, every week. Or D, the employee doesn't work well with other employees. So in this case, the answer is going to be B, the employee could take on another project. So a low utilization rate, in the case of A, it is not A because the utilization rate isn't looking at a total amount of hours worked. So even if you had a new employee who had only worked maybe 100 hours, so just over 2 weeks, they could still have a very high utilization rate because within those 100 hours, maybe they were billable for 90, and so their utilization rate would be 0.9. So has nothing to do with the total hours amount of hours worked. It has more to do with the percentage of those hours worked that are billed out, or that the employee was making the firm money. C, the employee is completing multiple CA hours every week. Hopefully that construction administration is going to be billable and included within the compensation for the architect. So it's not C. And then D, the employee doesn't work well with other employees. Right, there's just no way to know by looking at the utilization rate whether or not they work well with other employees. So again, the answer here is B. The employee could take on another project.
Quick question for you here.
Sure.
Paul, the question is over on the community. Does that mean, and again, this maybe backs up a little bit before this, but there's a question about billable rate. And so does that mean that billable rate is typically more than direct labor cost per hour? Not sure if that makes sense.
Right. So direct labor, and that's kind of where we're going here. So calculating direct labor. So direct labor is an internal number. So these are numbers where we're talking about the cost of things to the firm. So not how much money they're charging the client for work completed, but how much it actually costs internally. So with direct labor, you're looking at, okay, this principal is making $100,000 a year. The cost of direct labor is going to be how much the firm paid, or what, I guess, what percentage did the firm pay of that $100,000 salary where the principal was working on something that's actually going to bring money back into the firm. So when you're talking about a billable rate, the direct labor, the cost of paying someone to make you money, essentially, which is what the direct labor cost is. With the billable rate, you have to cover the cost of that direct labor, and you have to cover the cost of the rent of your office, and the cost of computers, the cost of supporting staff, cost of coffee if your firm, or tea. My firm made a decision to get rid of the coffee maker when I actually wasn't there that day, or I probably would have voted no. But
That's funny.
anyway, so the cost of coffee, you know, things like that are all going to be covered under that billable rate. So I think we should circle back to billable rates, I think, after maybe the next couple questions when we have
Perfect.
more down about direct labor and indirect labor.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul.
Good. Yeah, you bet. So calculate the direct labor costs for the year. So this is the direct labor cost to the firm for the entire year for everybody working. So first we need to figure out how much in direct labor did the firm pay each individual employee. So we're going to multiply their salary, we're going to multiply it by the utilization rate. And then that is going to give us the direct labor cost to the firm. So here we have 100,000 times 0.72. And I will say 0.72, these are all rounded to the nearest 10th or 100th place. And so these numbers that I'm about to put down for direct labor, I know that they're going to seem a little crazy, but it's because we made this in Excel, an Excel spreadsheet, which of course doesn't round numbers and then multiply them together. So the actual utilization rate of 1500 divided by 2080 is going to be 0.723865 or something like that. So anyway, that's why when I write down this direct labor number of 72,115.38, that's why it's not just $72,000, because 0.72 times 100,000 would be 72,000, but this direct labor number is a little more exact. So then likewise, we'll take the salary for the project architect, we'll multiply it by this utilization rate, and we get $64,903.85. Architect in training times the utilization rate, we're going to get $42,644.23. And then it would be the same down here, since these two architect and trainings are making the same amount and build out the same amount of hours. And then lastly, for our administrative staff, we take that 30,000 times 0.06 and we get $1,730.77. So now that we have all of these numbers, we know of that principal's $100,000 salary, since they billed out 72% of their time, that means that the firm paid that principal $72,115.38 to essentially make them money. And then since the other 0.28% or 28%, 0.28% percent of the principal's time was not to billable things, that is going to be indirect labor that needs to be covered in the overhead of the firm. So if we add up all of these direct labor costs for the year, we get a grand total of $224,038.46. Right, so that's the total cost to the firm. So you take the salary times the utilization rate, get each individual's direct labor cost, and then add them all up and you get $224,038.46. All right.
I think we need to raise that architect in training's utilization rate, man.
Yep, 15%. Yeah, get it back up to like 0.95, something like that. All right, so why is it important to understand this direct labor cost? So why is it important to understand what the firm is paying internally to its employees to make them money? So is it A, the firm's overhead rate cannot be correctly calculated without understanding how much is being paid out to employees for direct labor? Or B, the direct labor cost directly sets the billable rate for each employee? C, without the direct labor cost, you cannot calculate the indirect labor cost? Or D, direct labor cost is the same as net revenue? So In this case, our answer here is going to be A. And there's some other, I would say D is almost correct, but not quite. Or excuse me, um, that's not what I meant. B is almost correct, but not quite. So we're getting closer to understanding billable rates for each employee. So since direct labor is about the costs incurred by the firm, the direct labor is partially responsible for understanding that billable rate, but it doesn't get us all the way there. C, without the direct labor costs, you cannot calculate the indirect labor costs. This isn't exactly true. There are other ways that you could calculate indirect labor costs besides starting with the direct labor and subtracting it from the total amount you're paying in labor. And then D, direct labor cost is the same as net revenue. That's just not correct. All right. So here we're going to get into indirect labor. So this is the other side of the coin from direct labor. So here we have that number that we just figured out, $224,038.46, which is the total amount the firm paid out to its employees for time that they were working to make the firm money. So the indirect labor is going to be the opposite of that. So how much money did the firm pay to its employees for work that was not directly making the firm money, wasn't bringing money back into the firm? So in order to figure this out, what we need to do is we need to figure out, okay, what did the firm pay total in labor? So if we add up all of these salaries, if we add them all together, we're going to get a total of $305,000. So the firm paid $305,000 in salaries for the year. And then we need to take this number and we need to subtract the direct labor in order to find the indirect labor. So if we do that, $305,000 and we subtract the $224,038.46, and I'll put, you're going to be left with $80,961.54. So that means that while the firm paid out this $224,038.46 to its employees while they were making the firm money, the firm also had to pay out $80,961.54 to its employees in the form of salary for time that that employee wasn't actually involved in making the firm money. So I hope that makes sense as the other side of the coin there. So then we move on to number 8. Which of the following is not an indirect expense? A new coffee maker for the office, computer repair charges, product research for an ongoing project, or D, a firm manager explaining to the firm how to use a new billing software. So here it's going to be C. C is not an indirect expense because product research for an ongoing project, that time can be billed to that project. So it is going to be considered direct labor. Everything else here is going to be an indirect expense. So the new coffee maker for the office is going to go into the sort of general overhead of the office. Computer repair charges will also go into that general overhead. And then a firm manager explaining to the firm how to use a new billing software, that's going to be indirect labor because the firm manager is taking time that they're pulling a salary for and they're doing something that's not directly making the firm money. So likewise, that firm manager is explaining to the firm how to use the billing software. We would imagine that there would also be employees sitting, listening to that firm manager explain how to use that new billing software. So their time while they are learning to use this new billing software is going to also be indirect labor. And indirect labor as a whole ends up getting added to the total indirect cost that the firm is incurring. So indirect labor is itself an indirect expense. So understanding that indirect labor is an indirect expense is extremely important when you are calculating the overhead rate. So the overhead rate is the total indirect expenses divided by the total direct labor cost. Or I guess you could say the total indirect cost divided by the total direct labor cost. And in order to figure out this number, total indirect expenses, we need to add up the total office expenses, these other general indirect expenses, which like we just discussed, might be a coffee maker, might be computer repair charges, could be rent, could be electrical bills, things like that. And then we have to add in also the indirect labor, which in the last or 2 questions ago, we figured out was $80,961.54. So again, that's just the portions of the salary that's paid out by the firm that went to employees who weren't actually involved in something that brings money directly back in. So when you add all these up together, the 92,000, the 198,000, this 80,000, you end up with $371,711.54 total for the year in indirect expenses. And so since we know that the overhead rate is the total indirect expense divided by the total direct labor cost, we simply take this number here and we put it over our total direct labor costs that we calculated a few slides ago, 224,000. Sorry about my handwriting here. 3846. And our overhead rate comes out to, when you divide the 371 by the 224, is going to be 1.66 or 1.65 if you don't round. So this overhead rate and the overhead rate in general as a number, it's really an interesting number because this is, you could also look at it as a dollar amount. So you could look at it as $1.66 since this is essentially a ratio of your total indirect cost divided over your total direct labor cost, where you're, if we take this definition up here and we sort of write it a different way. So we have our total indirect expenses over our total direct cost. So this is a ratio where we're reducing the denominator down here, this total direct labor cost, where we're reducing it down to 1 in order to look at our total indirect expense in terms of total direct labor cost. So when we do that down here, and we get this 1.66, what this means is that for every $1 the firm paid to its employees in direct labor, the firm incurred $1.66 of additional cost in order to keep that employee in their chair in front of a computer with the lights on and the office rent paid. So overhead rate is a ratio where we're looking at the total indirect expense in terms of total direct labor cost. Mark, does that make sense? I think that's, of all the things today, I think that's the biggest one to take home is the
Yeah.
overhead rate and how that works.
Yeah, and I think just to say a couple of things back to you to make sure that I'm hearing it right and then everybody else is hearing it right. Um, that's why. So when you're working at a firm, and most architects and most firms have to track their hours, and you have to track your hours to a specific project. And in most firms, especially if you're a younger architect, they're trying to if you were working 40.0 hours on your project and you weren't doing anything else except, let's say, drawing construction documents for 40 hours, then your utilization rate would be 100%, which would mean all of your time um, is being paid for directly, by your client. But in a lot of cases, as you guys know, right, you have a team meeting or you have like a whole office meeting. Well, that's not for your specific project. Maybe you have a learning session, or maybe you're working on, kind of, what's an example? Um, maybe you're training someone how to use Revit or something like that. Like, that's probably not attributable to a specific project. So it starts to kind of reduce the amount of, let's say, efficiency or utilization that the firm is, let's say, receiving from the time that you're spending. So
Right.
when you're running a firm, you want folks' utilization rates to be really high. And what's always kind of funny is, when you're a young architect, your project manager is usually pushing you to be above 80% utilization rate, or whereas when you're a principal, your utilization rates are a lot less, because a lot of principals are out there trying to get work.
Mhm.
So they're spending a lot of time doing presentations or proposals, which oftentimes that work isn't paid for. Um, so I guess that's one thing that sort of strikes me, I guess. And then the second is just, you guys can see in this, indirect expenses, right? So the cost of the office, the cost of your computer, the cost of your Revit subscription, all of that stuff. Those are the other expenses that the company basically has to pay for in order for you to do your work. And so what's cool about this ratio is it's a ratio that helps you sort of look at a business and say, like, all right, how are things going? Like, could we, in order to improve our overhead rate, could we reduce our indirect expenses, or could we improve our utilization rate among our team? So it's a sort of a financial metric or a performance metric that helps firms navigate, the operations of their business. How did I do there, Paul? Did I pass?
That's great. Yeah, that's a great summary. And I think just also adding into that when you're talking about principals that are out doing, trying to get work or are writing proposals for work, that they're not getting, like you said, directly paid because they're not billing their time out that then is coming back, as um, checks from the client. You're not going to be getting a check for writing a proposal to a new client. So that's why you need to track all of that time as indirect labor so that you can add it into the just general costs, the general overhead of the firm, in order to make sure that uh, it is being covered at some point. So we take this overhead rate, um, and with it, we can figure out the break even rate. And once we know our break even rate, we can then set our billable rate. So um, tracking your indirect labor and including it within uh, those indirect expenses will in the long run, I guess, get you paid, if that makes sense.
Yep. And I also remember, just going back to my days, I haven't been practicing for a while, but back to my days practicing, I remember when we would have, every once in a while, the office would sort of agree to do a design competition. And the financial impact of doing a design competition is pretty severe, because
Mm-hmm.
most design competitions, you're not getting paid. So there is no direct labor, because you're not getting paid for the work. Um,
Right.
so you'd have 3 or 4 people working. You guys know, when it's design competition time, it's not 40 hours a week, it's 60, 70 hours a week. And the
Mm-hmm.
firm is essentially not getting paid to do any of that work. So it's having an impact on the overhead rate of the whole company, which is why when I was at Gensler, there was always, an interest in doing that kind of work, but always, some consideration of like, okay, trying to minimize the impact, the negative impact that would have on the financial performance of the company.
Right.
Paul, was there any more that you wanted to do here?
Yeah, so we have one final question.
Yeah, let's do it.
So it is, what could a high overhead rate indicate? And so A, the firm operates in a location with a high cost of living. B, the firm is spending too much on indirect expenses. C, the firm will have a low profit margin this year. Or lastly, answers A and C. So here the correct answer is going to be A. And this can be a little counterintuitive. So say, in our example before, we had this 1.66 as our utilization rate, but what if, or excuse me, not utilization rate, but overhead rate. So what if you had an overhead rate of 3.5, which means that for every $1 you're paying out on salary, you're also paying $3.50. So essentially, in order to break even, you need to bring back in $4.50 for every $1 that you're paying out to your employees. So if you have such a high overhead rate, it might just mean that you're in a location with a high cost of living because rent is super high. So rather than your salaries being your largest expense, excuse me, I'm about to cough. Hold on one sec.
No worries, man.
All right, sorry, I'm back. So rather than your employee salaries being your largest expense, here your office rent and your location are going to be your largest expense. And so a high overhead rate doesn't mean that your firm is doing poorly. It just means that you have a lot of overhead. So hold on, I need to mute again and cough one more time.
No worries.
Sorry about that. I swear it's allergies. I been all stuffed up. I did make sure I gotten 2 tests and they're all, it is just allergies. It's the first year I've ever considered that it might not be allergies. So anyway, this high overhead rate could just be because of where the firm is located. It doesn't necessarily mean the firm is spending too much on indirect expenses. So you could always bring down your overhead rate, but it's not 100% necessary to have a profitable firm. And then lastly, the firm will have a low profit margin this year. That's not true either, so long as you have a high billable rate that's covering this high overhead rate. So high overhead rate, as long as it's being covered by the billable rate, would still be okay. All right, so that's sort of that's the end of this, and then Mark, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you. I think you've addressed a lot of the questions that have come through. So as I mentioned, everyone will post an update to that one slide just to make sure everyone's on the same page about the correct answer. So thank you, Paul, for all of your help with this let's say sample of our virtual workshops, and thanks everybody for tuning in. As I mentioned in our next ARE live broadcast on December 17th, we're going to be speaking with a learning expert, a learning designer who we've worked with, who's really knowledgeable. We'll discuss the best study tactics and strategies to help you pass the ARE while focusing on some of the content and the material is important. Making sure you're using the right methods to retain that information in your brain is a really vital component to your studies. So again, I know I've learned a ton from her and expect that you guys will learn a lot, which will help fuel a lot of success for you on the ARE. So go to blackspectacles.com/podcast to sign up. If you want to learn more about our exam prep offerings, you can go to Black Spectacles. We can try out any of the course videos. We're sharing a link about that as well. And I swear we're going to come up with a winner of our T-shirt
Hmm.
contest. That's coming up here in a second. One of my teammates is grabbing the name and posting it here so that I can share it with everyone. And whenever oh yeah, so that's so Sadie, I think, Sadie.penna6. I hope I'm saying that right. You are the lucky winner of a Black Spectacles t-shirt, which, as Paul said, is very comfortable. I have about 90 of them in my house. My family thinks that's all I wear. But in any case, we'll reach out to you via email to get your size and shipping information. Just a reminder for all of you who'd like to be eligible to win a shirt like that, post a question you have about our featured topic in the community during ARI Live, and we always pick out one of the folks to win that t-shirt. So thanks everybody for tuning in. For those of you who are ready to start studying for the ARE right now and want access to the weekly virtual workshops we just previewed, you can choose the expert membership at checkout. That's the only one in which we offer the virtual workshop. So if you want virtual workshops, you're looking for the expert membership. And then if you want a discount, which is what I mentioned earlier, the discount is PcM 111220 TWI, which will get you a 15% discount for the entire duration of your Black Spectacles ARE prep membership. And then lastly, tomorrow we'll send you an email follow-up about today's live broadcast. So please let us know what you think and share any suggestions that you may have. I promise we read every word you write and use them to tune our next episodes. So thanks for watching.